The morning sun cut through the grimy windows of Murphy's diner like a blade, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stale air of eastern Pennsylvania. September 15th, 1987, a Tuesday. The kind of day that starts ordinary and ends with everything changed. Earl Ironside Crowley had seen 72 summers, but his hands remained steady as he lifted the chipped ceramic mug to his lips. Black coffee, no sugar. The same order he'd placed every Tuesday morning for 30 years. In the same corner booth that overlooked Main Street, where he could watch Millbrook slowly die. The steel mill's skeleton rose in the distance, its smokestacks silent monuments to better days. When Earl first returned from Korea in 1953, those stacks had belched fire and prosperity. Now they stood empty, rusting testimonials to a town that had lost its purpose. Half the storefronts on Main Street wore plywood where windows used to be. The other half would follow soon enough. Frank Murphy emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on an apron that had seen better decades. At 68, Frank moved like a man who'd learned to conserve energy. Economical, deliberate, nothing wasted. His Marine Corps training still showed in his posture, even as his joints protested the early hour. "Another beautiful day in paradise," Frank said, refilling Earl's cup without asking. Earl grunted. They'd had this conversation 1,000 times. It required no words anymore, just the comfortable silence of old soldiers who'd seen enough of the world to know that small talk was a luxury for people who hadn't watched their friends die in frozen Korean mud. The jukebox in the corner cycled through its playlist. Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA fading into something softer, more melancholic. The irony wasn't lost on Earl. Born in the USA, fought for the USA, came home to the USA, and for what? So a town like Millbrook could rot from the inside while politicians smiled and promised better days that never came. The bell above the door chimed. Earl didn't need to look up to know who had arrived. The wheelchair made a distinctive sound on the checkered linoleum, a soft whirring of electric motors, followed by the slight squeak of the left wheel that needed oil. He'd heard that sound 3 times a week for the past 18 months, ever since Hazel Brennan had started coming to Murphy's to draw. She positioned herself at the corner booth diagonal from his, near the window where the light was best. Her sketch pad came out first, then the wooden box of charcoal pencils her mother had given her for her 19th birthday. Earl watched from behind his newspaper as she settled in, her movements practiced and precise. Everything in its place, everything controlled. Hazel Brennan didn't look like someone carrying the weight of 2 tragedies. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing a face that had learned to mask pain behind concentration. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, practical clothes for a woman who'd stopped caring what people thought about her fashion choices around the same time she'd stopped being able to walk. Earl knew her father, had known him, past tense, the way you know a man who's been dead for 6 years. Captain Silas Brennan, Korean War, Chosin Reservoir. A man who'd saved Earl's life when Chinese forces had them surrounded in temperatures cold enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground. The debt still weighed on Earl like stones in his pockets. Garrett Flynn appeared from the kitchen, balancing a plate of pancakes with the careful attention of someone still learning the job. 26 years old, fresh out of the Army Rangers, and taking whatever work he could find in a town with no jobs and less hope. His short haircut and rigid posture screamed military to anyone who knew what to look for. Earl knew what to look for. "Morning, Miss Brennan," Garrett said, setting the plate down with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his calloused hands. "Hazel," she corrected, not looking up from her sketch pad. "We've been through this, Garrett. Miss Brennan makes me sound like a school teacher." "Yes, ma'am. I mean, Hazel." Garrett shifted his weight, clearly wanting to say more, but not knowing how. He'd served under Silas Brennan at Fort Benning, had learned everything he knew about being a soldier from the man whose daughter now sat in a wheelchair, because the world was cruel and random and didn't care about fair. Except it wasn't random, was it? Earl had spent 18 months asking questions, pulling threads, following breadcrumbs that led to places he didn't want to go. Nothing about Hazel's accident was random. Nothing about Silas's death 6 years earlier was random either. The truth was a stone in Earl's gut, getting heavier every day. Frank slid into the booth across from Earl, groaning as his knees protested. "You're thinking too loud, Ironside. I can hear it from the kitchen." "Thinking's free," Earl muttered. "Not the way you do it." Frank glanced toward Hazel, then back to Earl. "You planning to tell her?" "Tell her what?" "Don't play dumb with me. We both know what happened to Silas, and we both know her accident wasn't an accident any more than his was." Earl's jaw tightened. Knowing and proving are different things. Wade and the boys have been gathering evidence for months. You can't sit on this forever. "I'm not sitting on anything. I'm waiting for the right moment." "And when's that?" "When she gets killed too." Earl's hand tightened around his coffee mug, hard enough that his knuckles went white. Frank was right, and they both knew it. The Iron Brotherhood had been investigating Brennan Construction for 8 months, compiling evidence, connecting dots. They had enough to make noise, maybe enough to make a case. But making noise got people killed. Silas had made noise, and 2 weeks later he was dead in a car crash on Route 42. The same stretch of road where Hazel would lose the use of her legs 5 years later. The bell above the door chimed again. This time Earl did look up. 3 young men entered, moving with the careless swagger of people who'd never had to face consequences. Early 20s, expensive clothes, the kind of confidence that came from inherited money and unearned privilege. They owned the room before they'd taken 3 steps, and they knew it. Dalton Brennan led the pack. Earl recognized him immediately, Porter Brennan's son, Millbrook's crown prince, the boy who'd grown up believing the town was his birthright. He'd filled out since high school, adding muscle to his frame from hours in a gym that most Millbrook residents couldn't afford. His Nike sneakers probably cost more than Frank paid Garrett for a week's work. Behind Dalton came Chad Winters and Kyle Jensen, his ever-present shadows. Football players, both of them, riding Dalton's coattails in hopes that some of his privilege would rub off. The conversation in the diner died like someone had flipped a switch. Dalton's eyes swept the room, cataloging, dismissing, until they landed on Hazel. Something ugly flickered across his face. Recognition, followed by something darker. Old grudges, high school rivalries, the kind of petty resentments that should have been left behind, but never were. Earl set down his newspaper. His hand drifted to the table's edge, muscles tensing in ways they hadn't since Korea. Frank noticed. He always noticed. "Easy," Frank whispered. But Earl wasn't feeling easy. Dalton crossed the diner in long strides, his friends flanking him like wingmen. They stopped at Hazel's table, casting shadows across her sketchpad. She didn't look up, kept drawing, her hand moving in smooth strokes across the paper. "Well, well," Dalton said, his voice carrying across the quiet diner. "If it isn't the artist formerly known as Standing." A few customers shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Hazel's pencil paused for half a second, then continued its path across the page. "I'm trying to enjoy my breakfast, Dalton," she said, her voice level, controlled. "Don't you have something better to do?" "Actually, no." Dalton pulled out the chair across from her without asking, spinning it around to straddle it backwards. "It's Tuesday morning. Not much happening in Millbrook on Tuesday mornings. Figured I'd catch up with an old friend." "We were never friends." "No?" Dalton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I seem to remember you drawing a pretty detailed picture of me for the school paper. That seemed friendly, devoted even." Hazel finally looked up. Her green eyes met his blue ones without flinching. "That was a caricature. It was supposed to be funny." "Oh, it was hilarious. Me striking out at baseball while checking myself out in a mirror. Comedy gold. Really showed your artistic range." "I call it like I see it." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Chad and Kyle laughed on cue, the kind of forced amusement that came from people who didn't know how to be anything except their leader's echo. Garrett appeared from behind the counter, coffee pot in hand. His approach was casual, but Earl noticed the way his weight shifted, the way his free hand stayed loose and ready. Ranger training. You could take the man out of the army, but the army never fully let go. "Everything okay here?" Garrett asked. Dalton didn't bother looking at him. "Fine. Just catching up with an old classmate. The lady looks like she wants to be left alone." Now Dalton turned, his eyes sliding over Garrett with dismissive appraisal. "You're new. Let me give you some advice about how things work in Millbrook. My father is the mayor. That means my family owns half this town, including this dump. So unless you want to be looking for a new job by lunch, I suggest you mind your business and go pour coffee somewhere else." Garrett's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Your father might own the building, but in here, everyone deserves respect." Respect. Dalton tasted the word like it was sour. From a guy serving pancakes for minimum wage? That's rich. Earl's chair scraped against the linoleum as he stood. Frank grabbed his arm, but Earl shook him off. He'd been quiet for 18 months, sitting, watching, waiting. But there were limits to any man's patience, and Dalton Brennan had just found Earl's. "Son," Earl said, his voice carrying the weight of 7 decades, "you might want to reconsider your tone." Dalton finally looked at him, really looked, and Earl saw the moment of recognition. The old man from the corner booth, the regular who never caused trouble. Nobody worth noticing. "Or what?" Dalton asked. "You'll bore me to death with stories about the good old days." "Dalton," Hazel said quietly, her hand still on her pencil, "just leave, please." But Dalton was too far gone now, riding the high of his own cruelty, feeding on the attention. He turned back to Hazel, his smile sharp as broken glass. "You know what I never understood? Why you keep coming back here. Same diner, same time, 3 times a week. Drawing your little pictures like nothing's changed. But everything's changed, hasn't it, Hazel? You used to be somebody, star gymnast, college scholarship, future Olympian," they said. Hazel's knuckles went white around her pencil. "And now you're just..." Dalton made a vague gesture at her wheelchair. "This. The girl who couldn't take a turn too fast. The cautionary tale parents tell their kids about driving too fast on rainy nights." Earl took a step forward. Frank moved to intercept, but he was too slow, too far away. "That's enough," Garrett said, setting down the coffee pot. Dalton ignored him. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, getting close to Hazel's face. "Still drawing, though. Still pretending you're going to be famous. That's commitment, I'll give you that. Delusional, but committed." Hazel's hand trembled. The pencil hovered over the paper, and for a moment Earl thought she might stab Dalton with it. Part of him hoped she would. Instead, she looked up at Dalton with eyes that had seen too much pain to be frightened by schoolyard bullies. "Are you done?" "Not quite." What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Dalton's hand shot out, palm flat, and slapped down hard on Hazel's plate. The ceramic dish jumped, pancakes flying, syrup exploding outward in an amber wave that caught Hazel full in the face. Butter and maple syrup dripped down her cheeks, her flannel shirt pooling in her lap. The diner went silent. Not the uncomfortable silence from before, but something deeper, more terrible. The kind of silence that comes before violence, when the world holds its breath and waits to see which direction things will break. Hazel sat frozen, syrup running down her face like tears. Her hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests, knuckles bone white. She wasn't crying, wasn't screaming, just sitting there covered in her ruined breakfast, while Dalton Brennan grinned like he'd just won something. "Oops," Dalton said flatly. "Butterfingers." Earl was moving before his brain caught up with his body. 72 years old, knees that ached when it rained. But in that moment he was 20 again, charging across frozen Korean ground at an enemy that needed killing. Frank tackled him halfway across the diner. They went down in a tangle of old limbs and older fury, Frank using his weight to pin Earl against the checkered floor. "Don't!" Frank hissed in his ear. "Not like this, not now." Earl struggled, but Frank had position and leverage. "Let me go. So you can catch a assault charge? So Porter can have you locked up? Use your head, Ironside." Garrett had stepped between Dalton and Hazel, his body a barrier, his hands clenched into fists. Chad and Kyle flanked their leader, suddenly looking less confident now that things had turned physical. And Hazel reached for her water glass with a hand that wasn't shaking anymore. She lifted it, calm as sunrise, and threw the entire contents directly into Dalton Brennan's face. Ice water drenched his expensive haircut, his designer shirt, ran down his neck and soaked into his collar. He sputtered, shocked, his carefully cultivated image washing away with chlorinated tap water. The diner collectively held its breath. Dalton's face went through several colors: surprise, shock, then settling on rage, pure and incandescent. His hands shot out, grabbing the handles of Hazel's wheelchair, and jerked backward. The wheelchair tilted. For a horrible moment, it looked like Hazel would spill onto the floor. But Garrett was faster. He caught the chair, steadied it, put himself physically between Dalton and the woman he'd just assaulted. "You need to leave," Garrett said quietly. "Right now." "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," Dalton snarled, water still dripping from his hair. "My father will have you fired before lunch, and that's just the start. Your father doesn't own me. We'll see about that." Earl had stopped struggling against Frank's grip. He'd gone very still, very quiet, a different kind of dangerous. Frank felt the change and loosened his hold, letting Earl up but staying close. Earl walked to Hazel's table, didn't say anything, just reached into his wallet and pulled out a challenge coin. A Korean War veteran's medallion, bronze and worn from 37 years of being carried. He set it on the table next to Hazel's ruined breakfast. Dalton stared at the coin, confused. "What's that supposed to be?" Earl looked at him the way you'd look at something stuck to your shoe. "That's the mark of a man who served his country with honor. Something you wouldn't understand." "I don't have to understand anything from you, old man." "No," Earl agreed, "but you should understand this. The young lady you just assaulted is the daughter of Captain Silas Brennan, a hero, a man worth 10 of you on your best day." Something flickered across Dalton's face. Not recognition exactly, but calculation. His eyes slid from Earl to Hazel and back again. "I don't care whose daughter she is. She threw water at me. After you assaulted her first." Garrett's voice was hard as hammered iron. "I saw everything. So did everyone else in this diner." Dalton looked around at the assembled witnesses, old men and women who'd lived in Millbrook their whole lives, who knew his father, who voted in every election. People who mattered, even if Dalton didn't think they did. "Whatever," he muttered, trying to salvage his dignity. "I don't have time for this anyway. Come on." Chad and Kyle followed him toward the door, shooting nervous glances over their shoulders. At the threshold, Dalton turned back. "This isn't over, Hazel. Not even close." The bell chimed as they left, incongruously cheerful. The diner exhaled collectively. Conversation resumed in whispers and murmurs. Frank moved behind the counter, grabbing towels. Garrett knelt beside Hazel's wheelchair, helping her clean syrup from her face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the violence he'd almost committed. Earl stood beside her table, looking down at the challenge coin. Hazel stared at it like it was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "You knew my father?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "Yes, ma'am, I did. He never mentioned you. He wouldn't have. Your daddy kept his military life separate from his family life. Wanted you and your mother to see him as a husband and father, not a soldier." "Were you friends?" Earl considered the question. Friends seemed too small a word for what he and Silas had been. Brothers, maybe. Comrades. Men who'd stood back to back in frozen hell and come out the other side. We served together in Korea, Earl said finally. Chosin Reservoir, winter of 1950. Your father saved my life. Saved 11 lives that night, charging through Chinese lines in 40 below cold. Bravest thing I ever saw. Hazel's eyes were wet, but no tears fell. He never talked about the war. The good ones never do. Earl reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. A Motorola Dyna TC, huge and brick-like, one of the first commercial mobile phones. It cost a fortune and got terrible reception, but it served its purpose. I need to make a call, Earl said, if you'll excuse me. He stepped outside into the September morning. The air was crisp, autumn beginning to assert itself over summer's last gasps. Earl walked to the alley beside the diner, where his Harley was parked. A 1972 shovelhead, lovingly maintained, more reliable than most of the people he knew. He dialed from memory. The phone rang 3 times. Merrick. The voice on the other end was gravel and whiskey, aged like fine bourbon. Code Eagle, Earl said quietly. Murphy's Diner. Silas's daughter. A pause. Status? Assaulted, publicly, by Porter Brennan's son. Injuries? Pride, mostly. But it's time, Wade. We can't wait anymore. Another pause, longer this time. Earl could almost hear Colonel Wade Merrick thinking, calculating, planning with the tactical mind that had kept men alive through Korea and a dozen other conflicts the public never knew about. 20 minutes, Merrick said finally. Hold the line. Roger that. Earl ended the call and stood in the alley, watching the sunlight paint Millbrook's dying Main Street in shades of gold. In 20 minutes, everything would change. The careful investigation, the months of gathering evidence, the slow accumulation of proof, all of it would accelerate into something unstoppable. He'd made a promise to Silas Brennan 37 years ago. Brothers in arms. If anything happens to me, watch over my family. Earl was done watching, done waiting. It was time to act. He walked back into the diner. Frank was sweeping up broken ceramic while Garrett helped Hazel clean the last of the syrup from her wheelchair. She looked up when Earl entered, questions in her eyes. "Why did you call me the daughter of a hero?" she asked. "Because that's what you are. I didn't do anything heroic. I just exist." Earl sat down across from her, uninvited but not unwelcome. "Your father earned a Silver Star in Korea. Did you know that?" Hazel shook her head. "Saved an entire platoon. Led a counterattack that opened an escape route when we were surrounded. 17 men made it home because of him. I was one of those men. Mom never told me. She probably didn't know the details. Silas didn't talk about his medals, didn't need the recognition. He just did what needed doing and came home to be your father." Hazel's hand found the challenge coin, fingers tracing its worn surface. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you need to know what kind of man raised you. The courage it takes to face fear and do the right thing anyway. He had it, and I'm betting you do too." Before Hazel could respond, the sound reached them. Distant at first, a low rumble, like thunder on the horizon, but growing, steadily, inevitably. The sound of multiple motorcycles approaching in formation. Earl checked his watch. 18 minutes. Merrick had shaved 2 minutes off his estimate. The colonel always was punctual. Frank stopped sweeping. Garrett straightened, his military training making him automatically assess threats and escape routes. Other diners moved to the windows, pressing their faces against the glass. The rumble grew louder, closer. The very windows of Murphy's Diner vibrated with the approaching engines. Hazel looked at Earl, confusion and something else, maybe fear, maybe hope, in her eyes. "What's happening?" Earl stood, straightening his jacket, rolling his shoulders the way he used to before combat. "That, Miss Hazel, is the sound of brothers coming home." The first motorcycle appeared at the end of Main Street. A Harley-Davidson, chrome gleaming in the morning sun, ridden by a man who sat his bike like he was born to it. More appeared behind him. One after another, forming a perfect V formation that any military unit would envy. 15 motorcycles total, 15 riders, all men in their 60s and 70s, wearing leather jackets emblazoned with the same patch. An eagle clutching a motorcycle chain, wings spread against the backdrop of an American flag. Above the eagle, in faded letters, Iron Brotherhood. Below, Korean War Veterans, 1951. They pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's Diner with parade ground precision, each bike finding its place, each rider killing his engine at exactly the same moment. The sudden silence was deafening after the sustained roar. The lead rider dismounted, Colonel Wade Merrick, 70 years old, and still carried himself like the Special Forces officer he'd been. 6'2", shoulders that hadn't bowed with age, a beard trimmed with military precision. His leather jacket bore more patches than the others, unit insignias, campaign ribbons, the accumulated honors of a lifetime in service. He walked toward the diner like he owned it. The other 14 riders followed, forming up behind him in loose ranks. Old men, all of them, but moving with the discipline of soldiers who'd never quite left the battlefield. Earl held the door open. The Iron Brotherhood filed into Murphy's Diner, and the very air changed. These weren't weekend riders playing at being tough. These were men who'd earned their leather through blood and sacrifice, who'd come home from Korea and found they needed each other more than the world needed them. Colonel Merrick's eyes swept the room, cataloging, assessing. They landed on Hazel, still sitting at her table with syrup stains on her shirt and questions in her eyes. He crossed the diner in 3 long strides. "Miss Hazel Brennan?" His voice was gravel and honey, the kind of voice that commanded without needing to shout. "Yes?" Merrick reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, worn soft with age and handling. He placed it on the table beside Earl's challenge coin. The photograph showed 3 young men in leather jackets standing beside motorcycles. Early 1950s, judging by the bikes. They were laughing, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, young and alive and untouched by the decades that would follow. Hazel leaned forward, squinting at the image. Then her breath caught. The man in the center, broad smile and clear eyes, was her father. "Captain Silas Brennan," Merrick said quietly. "Iron Brotherhood, founding member." Hazel looked up at him, then at Earl, then at the 14 other bikers who'd filled the diner. "I don't understand." "Your father was one of us," Earl said. "A brother, and brothers don't abandon their own." Merrick pulled out the chair across from Hazel and sat, his movements deliberate, respectful. "Your father saved my life. Chosin Reservoir, December 1950. I was pinned down with 10 other men. Chinese forces had us surrounded. We were dead, just didn't know it yet. And your father led a counterattack through enemy fire that opened an escape route. Lost 2 men getting us out, but 9 of us lived because of him." "I never knew," Hazel whispered. "He didn't want you to." Silas believed his greatest accomplishment wasn't his silver star. It was being your father. Tears finally spilled over, running down Hazel's cheeks to mix with the syrup still sticky on her skin. "Why are you telling me this now?" Merrick's weathered face hardened. "Because 18 months ago, you had an accident on Route 42. Your car went through a guardrail that should have held but didn't. The investigation said you were driving too fast for conditions. Case closed." Hazel flinched like she'd been slapped. "I was. It was my fault." "No," Merrick's voice was gentle but firm. "It wasn't. That guardrail was installed by Brennan Construction in 1982. It was supposed to hold 10,000 pounds of force. Tests we conducted, privately, show it would fail at less than 3,000. The diner had gone completely silent. Even Frank had stopped pretending to work, standing behind the counter with his towel hanging forgotten in his hands. "The guardrail was defective," Earl said quietly. "Substandard materials. Falsified inspection reports. Your accident wasn't bad luck, Hazel. It was negligence. Criminal negligence." Hazel's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests. That's not possible. It's true, Merrick said, and it's not the only accident. 3 other incidents on Brennan construction projects. 1 fatality, 2 serious injuries, all ruled accidental, all conveniently forgotten. Why are you investigating construction projects? The question hung in the air. Merrick and Earl exchanged a look. 37 years of friendship and warfare condensed into a single glance. A decision made. Because, Merrick said slowly, carefully, your father was investigating Brennan Construction before he died. He found evidence of fraud, bribery, systematic violation of safety codes. He was scheduled to meet with the State Transportation Department on March 17, 1981. Hazel's face went pale. My father died March 16, 1981. Yes. The single word carried the weight of 6 years of investigation, suspicion, and terrible certainty. Car accident, Merrick continued, his voice soft but relentless. Route 42, same stretch of road. Vehicle left the highway, went through a guardrail installed by Brennan Construction, and crashed into a ravine. Police ruled it driver error. Rainy night, slick roads, case closed. No, Hazel shook her head violently. No, my father's death was an accident, just an accident. It can't. We don't have proof, Earl interrupted gently. Not the kind that would hold up in court, but the timing, Hazel, the location, the convenient failure of safety equipment. Your father was going to expose Porter Brennan's empire, and the day before he could, he died. Hazel was shaking now, her whole body trembling. You're saying Porter Brennan murdered my father? We're saying it's possible, likely even. And 5 years later, when you had your accident on the same road, Merrick let the sentence hang unfinished. Not random bad luck, not fate, not God's will or any of the other platitudes people had offered her in the 18 months since she'd woken up paralyzed in a hospital bed. Murder and negligence, greed and corruption, her father dead, her legs gone, all because one man valued money over lives. The diner door burst open. Porter Brennan stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair styled with television-ready perfection. At 55, he looked like what he was, a successful politician who'd spent decades building an image of respectability and civic duty. Behind him stood Sheriff Morris, belly hanging over his belt, hand resting on his service weapon. And behind them, looking shaken and damp, Dalton Brennan. What the hell is going on here? Porter's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Merrick stood slowly, turning to face his old enemy. Hello, Porter. It's been a long time. Porter's face went through several emotions. Surprise, recognition, then settling into cold calculation. Wade Merrick, I heard you'd crawled back to Millbrook. Never left, just been working quietly. I got a call that my son was assaulted in this establishment by a gang of motorcycle thugs harassing him and his friends. That's not what happened, Frank interjected from behind the counter. Your son assaulted Hazel Brennan, slapped her breakfast into her face. These gentlemen arrived afterward. Porter's eyes slid to Hazel, taking in her syrup-stained clothes, her red eyes, her trembling hands. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition of a problem he'd hoped was buried. Hazel, he said, his voice softening into politician mode. I'm terribly sorry if my son was rude. You know how boys can be. Thoughtless. I'll speak to him about appropriate behavior. Appropriate behavior? Earl's voice cut like a knife. He assaulted her, publicly, grabbed her wheelchair. That's battery, Porter, in front of 15 witnesses. Porter's jaw tightened. And who are you to lecture me about assault? I count 15 bikers who just happened to show up at exactly the right moment. Looks like intimidation to me. We're veterans, Merrick said quietly. Iron Brotherhood. Brothers of Captain Silas Brennan. And we're here because someone needed to stand up for his daughter when she was attacked by a coward. The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Dalton bristled. "You can't talk to me like that." "I just did." Sheriff Morris stepped forward, his hand still on his weapon. "Colonel, I'm going to need you and your people to leave. Now, before this becomes a situation." "A situation?" Frank laughed bitterly. "Where were you?" "That's slander, Frank. Watch yourself." "Truth isn't slander." Porter raised a hand, silencing everyone with a gesture. "Gentlemen, this is getting out of hand. Hazel, I apologize for my son's behavior, including the people you've cheated with your construction projects." Porter's mask slipped for just a second. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. Route 42, substandard guardrails, falsified inspection reports, 3 accidents, 1 death. Sound familiar?" "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "We're working on it." "Then I suggest you work quietly. False accusations against public officials can have consequences." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." The two men faced each other across Murphy's Diner. Colonel Wade Merrick and Mayor Porter Brennan, old enemies from a shared past neither wanted to acknowledge. The air between them crackled with 30 years of accumulated grievances. Finally, Porter turned to his son. "Dalton, apologize to Miss Brennan." "What? But—" "Now." Dalton's face went through several colors before settling on sullen resentment. "Sorry," he muttered, not looking at Hazel. "For the breakfast thing." It was the most insincere apology Hazel had ever heard, and from the look on Porter's face, he knew it too. But politicians dealt in appearances, and this checked the box. "Good," Porter said. "Now, Sheriff, I believe these bikers are creating a public disturbance. I want them out." Morris looked uncomfortable. "Porter, they haven't actually done anything illegal. They're intimidating citizens. That's illegal. With respect, Mayor, I've got 15 witnesses who'll say they've been nothing but polite. On the other hand, I've got 15 witnesses to your son assaulting Miss Brennan." Porter's eyes narrowed. "Are you refusing a direct order from your superior?" "I'm saying this isn't a situation that requires police intervention. Yet." The yet carried weight. Merrick nodded to Earl. "We should go. We've made our point." Earl looked at Hazel, seeing the confusion and fear and dawning realization in her eyes. "Will you come with us? To our clubhouse? There's more you need to know. About your father. About what really happened." Hazel looked at the photograph still lying on the table. Her father, young and alive, surrounded by the brothers who'd stood with him. Then at the Iron Brotherhood arrayed around the diner, old men with hard eyes and honorable intentions. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll come." Porter's face darkened. "Hazel, I don't think that's wise. These men knew my father, which is more than you ever did. It was a small rebellion, but it landed like a hammer." Porter's carefully constructed mask cracked further, revealing the calculation beneath. He looked at Hazel like she was a problem he'd need to solve. Garrett appeared at Hazel's side. "I can drive her. Make sure she gets there safely." "You're fired," Porter said flatly. Garrett smiled. "Can't fire someone who already quit. Frank, I appreciate the opportunity, but I think my services are needed elsewhere." Frank nodded, understanding passing between two veterans who'd both served and both knew what duty looked like. "Go with God, son." The Iron Brotherhood filed out of Murphy's Diner in the same formation they'd entered, with Merrick leading and Earl bringing up the rear. Hazel followed in her wheelchair, Garrett walking beside her, one hand resting on the chair's handle, protective without being possessive. Outside, the September sun had climbed higher, warming the autumn air. The 15 Harley-Davidsons sat waiting, chrome gleaming, engines silent but ready. Merrick turned to face the diner one last time. Through the window, he could see Porter watching, phone already to his ear, making calls, damage control, threats, whatever tools a corrupt politician used when his empire started showing cracks. "This isn't over," Merrick said quietly to Earl. "No, it's just beginning. Porter will come at us, hard. Let him. We've got truth on our side. Truth doesn't always win, brother. Earl looked at Hazel being helped into Garrett's truck, her wheelchair being carefully folded and stowed. No, but it's worth fighting for anyway. The engines roared to life, 15 motorcycles speaking as one. They pulled out of Murphy's diner in formation, escorting Garrett's truck like a presidential motorcade. Down Main Street they rode, past the closed storefronts in the dying steel mill, past the town that had forgotten what honor looked like. Inside the diner, Porter Brennan stood at the window, watching them go. His hand tightened on his phone hard enough that the plastic creaked. Beside him, Sheriff Morris shifted uncomfortably. Porter, if what they're saying is true, it's not. But if it is, it's not. Porter's voice was ice. And even if it were, it doesn't matter. I've worked too hard, built too much, to let a group of aging bikers tear it down. Understand? Morris understood. He'd been on Porter's payroll for 15 years. He understood perfectly. What do you want me to do? Porter was quiet for a long moment, watching the motorcycles disappear around a distant corner. When he spoke, his voice was soft, dangerous. Find out what they know, who they've talked to, what evidence they think they have. And then we remind them that some stones are better left unturned. The motorcycle's engines faded into the distance, leaving only the normal sounds of a Tuesday morning in Millbrook. Ordinary, peaceful, but Earl Ironside Crowley knew better. He'd survived Chosin Reservoir. He'd watched friends die in frozen Korean mud. He'd made a promise to a brother 37 years ago, and he'd be damned if he'd break it now. The war had come to Millbrook, and this time the Iron Brotherhood wasn't running. They were riding straight into the fire. The Iron Brotherhood clubhouse sat on the eastern edge of Millbrook, where the town gave way to Pennsylvania woodland. It had been a warehouse once, back when the steel mill ran 3 shifts and needed storage for equipment that never stopped moving. Now it served a different purpose, a sanctuary for men who'd come home from war to find that home didn't quite fit anymore. Hazel watched through Garrett's truck window as the building came into view. Weathered brick, small windows, a simple sign above the entrance displaying an eagle clutching a motorcycle chain, wings spread against an American flag. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious, just solid and real, like the men who gathered there. The motorcycles pulled into formation in the parking lot, each rider finding his designated spot with practiced precision. Engines cut simultaneously, and the sudden silence felt significant, like the breath before a confession. Garrett helped Hazel into her wheelchair, his movements efficient but gentle. She'd noticed that about him, the way he handled things with care while maintaining an edge of readiness. Ranger training, probably, always prepared for things to go wrong. Colonel Merrick waited by the entrance, holding the door open. Welcome, Miss Hazel. Your father stood exactly where you're standing the first time he came here. Spring of 1951, just back from Korea, didn't know quite what to do with himself. The interior was larger than Hazel expected. High ceilings with exposed beams, concrete floors softened by worn rugs. And the walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, creating a mosaic of military history that spanned 4 decades. Hazel wheeled herself closer to the nearest wall, her artist's eye cataloging details. Young men in uniform, older men on motorcycles, faces changing through the years, but eyes staying the same. That 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing things civilians never would. Wall of Honor, Earl said quietly, appearing beside her. Every man who's ever been Iron Brotherhood. Some still ride, some moved away, some are gone. His finger traced a path through the photographs, stopping at one from the early 50s. 3 young men, barely 20, standing beside motorcycles that looked brand new. They wore leather jackets and wide smiles, the war behind them but not yet processed, joy and trauma existing in the same breath. Hazel leaned forward. The man in the center had her father's eyes. His smile, the same way of standing with weight slightly on his left foot. Captain Silas Brennan, Merrick said from behind her. Age 22, 2 months home from Chosin. That's me on his left, Earl on his right. The three of us survived together, came home together, started Iron Brotherhood together. He never told me, Hazel's voice was barely a whisper, about any of this. He wanted you to know him as your father, not as a soldier, not as a biker. Earl's weathered face softened. Silas believed his greatest accomplishment wasn't his silver star, or his motorcycle, or even surviving Chosin. It was you, being your dad. He talked about you constantly, showed us your drawings, your report cards, every little thing you did. Tears blurred Hazel's vision. She'd spent 6 years thinking she understood her father, building a memory of him from the limited pieces she'd been given. Now these men were handing her an entire other life, whole and complete, that she'd never known existed. A woman appeared from a back room, carrying a tray with coffee and what looked like medical supplies. Late 50s, gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades making quick decisions under pressure. Dr. Ruth Caldwell, Merrick introduced, Army nurse, 3 tours after that in places that aren't in history books. She's our medic, our conscience, and occasionally our common sense when the rest of us get too stupid. Ruth set the tray down on a large wooden table that dominated the center of the room. I prefer voice of reason, but common sense works. She extended a hand to Hazel. Your father spoke of you often. He was very proud. The simple statement, delivered without drama or embellishment, hit harder than any grand pronouncement. Hazel shook Ruth's hand, feeling calluses that came from years of medical work and motorcycle riding in equal measure. Please, Ruth gestured to the table, sit. We have a lot to discuss, and you'll want coffee for this. Hazel positioned her wheelchair at the table. Garrett took a seat nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give space. The other Iron Brotherhood members filed in, finding chairs and stools, creating a semicircle around the table. 15 pairs of eyes, weathered and wise, focused on her with an intensity that should have been intimidating, but somehow wasn't. Merrick sat across from Hazel. He opened a worn leather satchel and began removing folders, laying them out with the methodical precision of someone presenting evidence at trial. What I'm about to show you, he said quietly, we've been gathering for 8 months. Since last January, when we decided we'd been quiet long enough. The first folder contained newspaper clippings. Hazel scanned the headlines. Local man dies in Route 42 accident. Investigation finds no mechanical fault. Weather conditions cited as factor. The date made her chest tight. March 17th, 1981. The day after her father died. Your father was investigating Brennan Construction, Merrick began. Started in late 1979 after he noticed irregularities in a bridge project. Wrong materials being delivered. Inspection reports that didn't match what he saw on site. Silas worked construction in summers during college. He knew what proper safety protocols look like. Earl picked up the thread. He started documenting everything, taking photographs, collecting procurement records, building a case. By early 1981, he had enough evidence to prove systematic fraud. Substandard materials, bribery of inspectors, safety violations that put lives at risk. Ruth opened a second folder, revealing what looked like engineering reports covered in technical annotations. These are the original specifications for the Route 42 guardrail replacement project. Contracted to Brennan Construction in 1982, the guardrails were supposed to be high-tensile steel, anchored every 6 feet, capable of withstanding 10,000 pounds of lateral force. She slid another document across the table. These are the actual installation records we obtained through a contact at the county records office. The guardrails installed were mild steel, anchored every 10 feet with inadequate foundation depth. Real-world testing suggests they'd fail at less than 3,000 pounds. Hazel stared at the numbers, her mind trying to process what they meant. My car hit the guardrail at approximately 45 miles per hour. The police report estimated the impact force at around 6,000 pounds, which means the guardrail should have held, Garrett said quietly, easily. The room was silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Hazel's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests, knuckles white. The accident she'd blamed herself for 18 months, driving too fast, taking the curve wrong, not being careful enough, had been inevitable. A death trap waiting for someone unlucky enough to trigger it. This wasn't the first failure, Merritt continued, opening a third folder. March 1983. Aaron Mitchell, age 34. Bridge collapse on Route 19. Brennan construction project. Investigations cited stress corrosion, ruled it an engineering miscalculation. No criminal charges. Another folder. September 1984. The Riverside Elementary School addition. Ceiling beam failure during construction. 2 workers injured, 1 permanently disabled. Investigation found material defect. Blame the supplier. Supplier went bankrupt before civil suits could proceed. One more folder. January 1986. Patricia Donovan, age 47. Her car went through the same Route 42 guardrail, same location. She survived with major injuries. Police reports cited driver error. Hazel's voice shook. How many people? That we can document? 14 injured, 2 deaths, counting your father. Merrick's face was stone. How many we can't document because the investigations were shut down or evidence disappeared? We don't know. Why didn't anyone do anything? Earl's laugh was bitter. Porter Brennan is mayor, has been for 12 years. Before that, he was on the town council for 8 years. He controls Sheriff Morris through campaign contributions and favors. He has relationships with state inspectors, county officials, judges. The system that's supposed to catch corruption is full of people who benefit from not looking too closely. But my father was going to expose him. Yes, Merrick's voice gentled. Silas had an appointment with the State Transportation Department on March 17, 1981. He was bringing evidence of fraud, bribery, systematic safety violations. The kind of evidence that would have triggered federal investigations, criminal charges, the collapse of Porter's entire empire. Ruth reached across the table, placing her hand over Hazel's. Your father died the night before that meeting, March 16th. Single-car accident on Route 42. The police report says he was driving too fast for wet conditions, lost control, went through the guardrail, a guardrail that Brennan Construction had just replaced the year before. The implications settled over Hazel like a shroud. Not random, not fate, murder dressed up as misfortune. You think Porter killed my father. We think Porter had your father killed, Merrick corrected. There's a difference. Men like Porter don't get their hands dirty. They hire people to solve problems. He opened one final folder. Inside were financial records, bank statements, canceled checks. Ruth pointed to a highlighted entry. March 20th, 1981, 4 days after your father's death. Check issued from Brennan Construction to Victor Cade, security consultant. $75,000. Another highlighted entry. November 1986. 8 months after your accident. Check to Victor Cade. $50,000. Who's Victor Cade? Earl's jaw tightened. Former military contractor. Dishonorable discharge in 1977 for conduct unbecoming. Since then, he's worked as what they call a security specialist. Translated from criminal, he makes problems disappear. You think this Victor killed my father and caused my accident. We think Porter hired him to eliminate the threat your father posed. And later, when you started asking questions about your accident, started looking at safety reports and construction records. I never asked questions, Hazel interrupted. I blamed myself. I thought it was my fault. Merrick leaned forward. But you might have, Eventually, you're your father's daughter, smart, persistent, not willing to accept easy answers. Porter couldn't take that risk, so he had Victor arrange another accident. Same location, same method. This time non-fatal, but effective enough to stop you from digging. The coffee in front of Hazel had gone cold. She stared at it, watching cream swirl in patterns that meant nothing and everything. Her entire understanding of the past 6 years was crumbling, revealing a darker architecture beneath. Why are you telling me this now? Because after what happened at the diner this morning, you're in danger. Earl's voice was flat, factual. Dalton assaulted you publicly. Porter knows we're involved. He's going to see you as a threat that needs managing. Managing? Intimidation, legal harassment, maybe worse. Hazel's phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet clubhouse. She checked the screen. Mom, I need to take this. She wheeled herself to a quieter corner, pressing the phone to her ear. Mom? Hazel, where are you? Maureen's voice was tight with worry. I got a call from Porter Brennan's office. They said you left Murphy's with some dangerous motorcycle gang. I've been trying to reach you. I'm fine, Mom. I'm with the Iron Brotherhood. They're friends of Dad's. A long pause. The Iron Brotherhood. You know about them. Another pause, longer this time. Hazel could hear her mother breathing, could almost feel the debate happening on the other end of the line. Yes, Maureen said finally. I know about them. Your father made me promise not to tell you. He wanted you to remember him as your dad, not as part of that world. They say Dad was investigating Porter Brennan, that he was going to expose corruption, that he was murdered. The silence stretched so long Hazel thought the connection had dropped. Mom? I suspected. Maureen's voice was barely audible. The timing was too perfect. The day before his big meeting, suddenly he's dead. But I had no proof. And I had a 7-year-old daughter to raise. What was I supposed to do? Wage war against the mayor of Millbrook with no evidence and no allies? You had the Iron Brotherhood. I had men who would have died for your father, but dying wouldn't have helped you grow up safe. I made the choice to keep quiet, to protect you. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe I should have fought. But I wanted you to have a chance at a normal life. Hazel watched through the window as the bikers talked among themselves. These old men who'd carried her father's secret for 6 years, waiting for the right moment to act. They have evidence now, documents, financial records, witness testimony. They're building a case. Hazel, her mother's voice turned sharp. Porter Brennan is dangerous. If he killed your father, if he caused your accident, then what? I should just let him get away with it? I'm saying you should be careful. These men, the Iron Brotherhood, they mean well, but they're from a different time. They think honor and justice matter more than survival. Sometimes survival is what matters. Dad didn't think that way, and your father is dead. The words hung between them, brutal and true. I'm staying, Hazel said quietly. I'm going to help them. Dad started this investigation. I'm going to finish it. Please, baby, think about this. I'll be careful, but I'm not running. She ended the call before her mother could argue further. When she turned back to the table, all 15 pairs of eyes were on her. Everything okay? Garrett asked. My mom knows. About the Iron Brotherhood. About Dad's investigation. She's scared. She should be, Earl said bluntly. Fear is appropriate when dealing with men who've already killed once. Merrick stood, gesturing for the others to gather closer. Which is why we need to accelerate our timeline. We've been moving slowly, carefully, building an airtight case. But after this morning, Porter knows we're active. He'll start destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses, using every tool he has to shut us down. What's the plan? One of the other bikers asked. Sergeant Miles Harding, according to the patch on his jacket. We go public. Take everything we have to the media, to state authorities. Create enough noise that Porter can't make it disappear quietly. We need more than circumstantial evidence, Ruth interjected. Financial records and suspicious timing aren't enough to prove murder. We need something concrete, a witness, physical evidence, something that directly links Porter to criminal activity. We need someone inside Brennan Construction, another biker said. Someone who can access the files Porter keeps hidden. The group fell silent, the problem clear to everyone. Getting inside Brennan Construction's headquarters would require either elaborate deception or inside help. Neither seemed likely. Hazel's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I need to talk. Alone. It's about my father. Dalton. She stared at the screen, certain it was a trap. Dalton Brennan, who'd humiliated her hours earlier, now wanted to talk about Porter? It didn't make sense. She showed the message to Merrick. His face darkened. Trap. Maybe, Hazel said, or maybe he knows something. Even if he does, meeting him alone would be suicide. Then I won't meet him alone. Earl shook his head. Still too dangerous. Porter's probably using his son to lure you out. Find out what we know. Hazel typed a response. Iron Brotherhood Clubhouse. Bring whatever you want to share. Come alone or don't come. She hit send before anyone could stop her. What are you doing? Merrick demanded. Calling his bluff. If it's a trap, we're on our own ground with 15 witnesses. If it's genuine, we might get the inside information we need. And if he brings the police, then we show them our evidence and let them decide who's telling the truth. Earl laughed despite himself. Silas used to do the same thing, turn defense into offense, make the enemy come to you. 20 minutes passed in tense silence. The Iron Brotherhood took positions around the clubhouse, not obviously armed, but ready. Hazel remained at the table, her sketch pad out, trying to calm her nerves by drawing. The pencil moved across paper in familiar rhythms, creating order from chaos. A car engine outside, a door slamming, footsteps approaching. The clubhouse door opened. Dalton Brennan stood in the entrance, alone. He looked different from this morning, smaller somehow, diminished. His expensive clothes were rumpled. His carefully styled hair fell across his forehead in disarray. And his eyes, when they found Hazel's, held something she'd never seen there before. Fear. 6 bikers moved to block his path. Dalton raised his hands, showing they were empty. I'm alone. No police. No father. Just me. Merrick stepped forward. Why? Because I need to show you something, and I need to do it before my father figures out I'm gone. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket, holding it up like an offering. Everything you're looking for, it's all here. Earl moved to take it, but Dalton pulled it back. I want to talk to Hazel first. Alone. Not happening, Garrett said flatly. Then this whole thing is pointless. Dalton's voice cracked slightly. I'm risking everything being here. The least you can do is give me 5 minutes. Hazel wheeled herself forward. Everyone, step back. Give us space, but stay close. Hazel, Merrick began. 5 minutes. If he tries anything, you can break him in half. But let me hear what he has to say. The bikers reluctantly moved to the edges of the room, creating a perimeter, but giving distance. Dalton approached the table slowly, like he was approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. He sat down across from Hazel, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. The bully and his victim. The mayor's son and the dead hero's daughter. 2 19-year-olds caught in a web spun by their father's choices. I'm sorry, Dalton said quietly, for this morning, for the last 4 years, for every time I made your life harder because it made me feel powerful. I'm sorry. Hazel's jaw tightened. You slapped my breakfast into my face, called me names, grabbed my wheelchair. Sorry doesn't fix that. I know, nothing fixes it, but I need you to understand, I'm not my father. I don't want to be my father. He placed the USB drive on the table between them. Last night, after what happened at the diner, Dad called me into his office. I thought he was going to yell at me for embarrassing the family. Instead, he congratulated me. Dalton's hands shook slightly. He said you were becoming a problem, that you had these bikers stirring up trouble, asking questions about old accidents and construction projects. He said it was good that I'd put you in your place, shown you that there were consequences for causing trouble for our family. Your father's a piece of work. You don't know the half of it. Dalton took a shaky breath. He kept talking, said your father had been a problem too, an idealist who didn't understand how the real world worked, how sometimes you had to cut corners to stay competitive, how people who couldn't accept that had to be dealt with. Hazel went very still. What exactly did he say about my father? He said Silas Brennan was going to destroy everything we'd built, that he was scheduled to meet with state regulators, bring evidence of violations that would trigger federal investigations. He said, Dalton's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He said it was handled, that problems like your father don't go away on their own, but with the right help, they go away permanently. The clubhouse was absolutely silent. 15 men who'd seen combat, who'd faced death and dealt it out, were frozen by the casual admission of murder. He was bragging, Dalton continued, his voice hollow, proud of himself for being smart enough to eliminate a threat before it became a real problem. And then he looked at me and said, the Brennan girl might need the same kind of handling. Victor's asking for $50,000 this time. Inflation, he says, but it'll be worth it to close this chapter permanently. Hazel felt like she was falling. Victor Cade, I've met him. He comes to the house sometimes for private meetings with Dad. Cold eyes, moves like a predator. Dad calls him our security consultant, but everyone knows what he really is. Dalton pushed the USB drive across the table. After Dad went to bed, I broke into his office safe. The combination is my mother's birthday. He's not as smart as he thinks. This drive has everything. Emails ordering substandard materials. Payment records to Victor Cade going back 8 years. Audio files of Dad discussing problems that needed permanent solutions. Why? Hazel's voice was raw. Why are you doing this? Because last night, while Dad was congratulating himself for being willing to have you killed, I realized I was turning into him. The cruelty, the entitlement, the belief that people like us could do whatever we wanted because we had money and power. And I decided I'd rather betray my father than become him. Merrick approached the table, picking up the USB drive with careful fingers. This better not be a trick, boy. It's not, check it. Everything you need to prove my father murdered Silas Brennan and tried to have Hazel killed is on that drive. Ruth appeared with a laptop, plugging in the drive. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, opening files, scanning documents. Her expression shifted from skepticism to shock to grim satisfaction. He's telling the truth, she said finally. Internal emails discussing material substitutions on Route 42. Payment records to Victor Cade, $75,000 in March 1981, $50,000 in November 1986, and 3 other payments in between for consulting services. And audio files. She clicked play. Porter Brennan's voice filled the clubhouse, tinny through laptop speakers but unmistakable. The Silas problem is getting out of hand. He's scheduled to meet with state transportation on the 17th. I need this handled before then. A different voice, cold and professional. Handled how specifically? I don't want to know details, Victor. Just make it look like an accident. Route 42 would be convenient. We just replaced those guardrails last year. The irony would be poetic. Ruth stopped the playback. The silence that followed was deafening. Earl spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. That's Silas's murder. Premeditated, recorded, admissible in court. There's more, Ruth said, opening another file. November 1986. Porter discussing the Mitchell girl, that's you, Hazel, and how you'd been asking questions about your accident. Victor suggesting another Route 42 incident. Porter approving a $50,000 payment. Hazel couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The evidence was there, undeniable and damning. Her father murdered, her accident orchestrated, all for money and power and the ego of a man who couldn't tolerate being exposed. Dalton stood abruptly. I need to go. If Dad realizes I'm gone, realizes the drive is missing, you're not going anywhere, Merrick said firmly. The moment Porter knows what you've done, you become a liability. You think he won't handle his own son? I can't stay here. I have to. You have to survive, Earl interrupted, which means staying where we can protect you. He's my father. He's a murderer who just lost his leverage. Garrett moved to block the door. You stay. Dalton looked around at the circle of bikers, old men with hard eyes who'd seen too much to be impressed by youth or privilege. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Okay, I'll stay. Hazel found her voice finally. Did you know, before last night, that Dad was corrupt? Yes. That he cut corners on projects, bribed officials? I suspected. But murder? Hiring someone to kill people? Dalton shook his head violently. I swear I didn't know, and I'm sorry I didn't figure it out sooner. I'm sorry your father is dead because mine is a monster. It wasn't forgiveness. Hazel wasn't ready for that, might never be ready. But it was something, acknowledgement perhaps, the beginning of truth. Merrick was already on the phone. We need to move fast. This evidence goes to the Pennsylvania State Police, the Attorney General's office, and every media outlet we can reach, simultaneously, before Porter can start damage control. Ruth was making copies of the USB drive, distributing them to different bikers. Multiple redundancies. Even if Porter manages to suppress one copy, the others surface. What about Hazel and Dalton? Garrett asked. Porter will retaliate. Safe house, Earl said. Bill's cabin, 20 miles outside town. Remote, defensible, off any grid Porter controls. Porter will call the police, Dalton warned. Say I've been kidnapped, that you're holding me against my will. Let him, Merrick said coldly. State police can sort out who's the real victim when they hear these recordings. A phone rang, not Hazel's, not Dalton's. The landline in the clubhouse office, an old rotary phone that predated cell networks. Frank Murphy's voice crackled through when Merrick answered. Wade, you need to know, Sheriff Morris just left the diner. He was asking questions about Hazel, where she went, who she left with. I didn't tell him anything, but he seemed real motivated to find her. Porter's moving already. There's more. I overheard him on his radio. He's putting out an APB on Hazel's description, calling her a vulnerable adult who may have been coerced or kidnapped. He's building a case for wellness check, which gives him legal cover to search for her. Merrick's jaw tightened. How much time do we have? Morris was headed to the courthouse to get a judge to sign off on the wellness order, maybe an hour before he has legal authority to start knocking on doors. Thanks, Frank. Keep your head down. Merrick turned to the assembled brotherhood. We're out of time. Porter's using the legal system to find Hazel before we can get our evidence public. We need to split up. Earl, take Hazel and Dalton to the cabin. Ruth, you go with them. Medical support if things go wrong. The rest of us stay here, create a diversion, make Porter think we're all holed up planning our next move. He'll come here, one of the bikers said, with Morris and whoever else he can muster. Good. Let him. While he's wasting time with us, Earl gets Hazel and the evidence somewhere safe. Hazel shook her head. I'm not running. This is my fight. This is everyone's fight, Merrick corrected gently. But you're the one Porter wants to silence. If he gets to you before we go public, all of this, the evidence, the recordings, everything, becomes he said, she said. Your father's daughter making wild accusations backed by files that could be faked. You stay alive, you stay free, you become the face of this case. You die or disappear, we lose the moral authority that makes people listen. He was right. Hazel knew he was right, but every instinct screamed against leaving these men to face Porter's wrath while she hid. Earl placed a hand on her shoulder. Silas made me promise to watch over his family. This is me keeping that promise. Let me get you somewhere safe. What about my mom? Porter might target her. Already handled, Ruth said, hanging up her own phone. I've got 2 brothers stationed outside Millbrook Hospital. Maureen will have protection until this is over. The sound of vehicles outside. Multiple engines. Heavy ones. Everyone froze. Merrick moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Sheriff's Department, 4 vehicles, Morris and at least 8 deputies. The wellness check came through fast, Garrett muttered. Or Porter pulled strings to skip the judge entirely. Merrick turned to Earl. Back way. Now. Don't stop until you reach the cabin. Earl was already moving, grabbing a leather jacket and a set of keys. Come on, both of you. Hazel and Dalton followed, Garrett pushing Hazel's wheelchair while Ruth grabbed a medical bag. They moved through the clubhouse toward a rear exit that led to a small parking area where civilian vehicles sat. Behind them, they heard Merrick opening the front door. Sheriff Morris, what brings you out on this fine day? Morris's voice, amplified and official. We have reason to believe you're harboring Hazel Brennan against her will. I need to see her, confirm she's safe. Miss Brennan is a grown woman, free to associate with whomever she chooses. Mayor Brennan is concerned about her welfare. Given her disability, we need to ensure she hasn't been coerced. You mean, given her disability, Porter assumes she's too weak to make her own decisions? That's insulting, Sheriff. The conversation faded as Earl bundled them into an old pickup truck, throwing Hazel's wheelchair in the back. Ruth climbed into the passenger seat, while Hazel and Dalton squeezed into the extended cab behind. Earl started the engine, pulling out slowly, avoiding the main lot where Morris's vehicles blocked the entrance. A dirt service road led away from the clubhouse, winding through trees toward a back exit most people didn't know existed. They'd made it maybe 200 yards when headlights appeared behind them. Company, Ruth said calmly, checking the side mirror. Earl accelerated, the old truck protesting but responding. Hold on. The vehicle behind matched their speed. A dark SUV, civilian plates but driven with professional precision. It closed the distance rapidly. That's not police, Dalton said, his voice tight with fear. That's Victor's vehicle. I've seen it at our house. Earl's jaw set. Everyone buckle up. This is about to get rough. The dirt road wound through thick Pennsylvania woodland, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles. Earl drove with the confidence of someone who'd navigated worse terrain under worse conditions. But the SUV had the advantage of power and modern suspension. It pulled alongside them, trying to force them off the road. Earl cut the wheel hard, sideswiping the SUV with a screech of metal on metal. The bigger vehicle wobbled but stayed upright, dropping back before surging forward again. He's trying to disable us, Ruth observed, her voice steady despite the violence. The SUV rammed them from behind. Hazel's head snapped forward, the seatbelt catching hard across her chest. Dalton let out a yelp of fear, but Earl kept control, steering into the impact to maintain stability. They burst out of the trees onto a secondary road, paved but narrow. Earl gunned the engine, the old truck reaching speeds it probably hadn't seen in years. The SUV matched them, pulling alongside again. Hazel caught a glimpse of the driver, a man in his 50s, scarred face, expressionless, handling the vehicle with casual expertise that spoke to military training. Victor Cade. He swerved toward them. Earl swerved away. The dance repeated twice, 3 times, neither vehicle giving ground. Then Victor did something unexpected. He pulled back, dropping behind them by 20 yards. Hazel saw him reach for something in the passenger seat. "Gun!" she screamed. Earl slammed the brakes. The sudden deceleration threw everyone forward. The SUV, traveling at 60 miles per hour, shot past them before Victor could react. By the time he slowed, Earl had already reversed direction, spinning the truck in a practiced bootlegger's turn and accelerating back the way they'd come. Secondary route, Earl muttered, taking a hard left onto what was barely more than a trail. Bill's cabin has 3 approaches. Victor knows the main road. He doesn't know this one. The truck bounced over roots and rocks, suspension groaning. Behind them, the SUV attempted to follow, but was too wide for the narrow trail. They heard the crunch of metal on trees, then the sound of the engine fading as Victor was forced to back out and find another path. Earl drove in silence for 10 minutes, navigating trails that looked like random woodland to anyone who hadn't spent decades exploring them. Finally, he pulled into a small clearing where a cabin sat nestled among pines. Bill's place. No road access from the main highway. Victor would need to know exactly where to look, and even then, he'd need an off-road vehicle to reach it. They unloaded quickly. The cabin was simple but solid. 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 50s. But it had running water from a well, a generator for electricity, and enough supplies to last a week. Ruth immediately began checking everyone for injuries. Minor bruises, some whiplash, but nothing serious. Dalton sat in a corner, shaking, the reality of being hunted by his father's hired killer finally sinking in. Hazel wheeled herself to the window, looking out at the darkening Pennsylvania woods. Somewhere out there, Victor Cade was searching. And back in Millbrook, Porter Brennan was mobilizing every resource he had to suppress the truth. But they had the evidence. They had Dalton's testimony. They had recordings that proved murder. And they had the Iron Brotherhood, old men who'd faced worse odds in frozen Korean mountains and come out victorious. Earl joined her at the window. Your father would be proud of you. Would he? I'm hiding in a cabin while other people fight my battles. No, you're staying alive to see justice done. There's a difference. Earl's weathered face softened. Silas used to say that courage isn't about rushing into every fight. It's about knowing which fights matter and seeing them through to the end. This matters, Hazel, and we're going to see it through. Outside, the Pennsylvania night settled over the forest. In the distance, if you listened carefully, you could hear the faint rumble of motorcycles. The Iron Brotherhood, riding their perimeter, standing guard. The war had truly begun. And this time, the old soldiers weren't backing down. The Pennsylvania State Police Barracks in Harrisburg sat 2 hours east of Millbrook, a concrete fortress that represented the kind of authority Porter Brennan couldn't buy or intimidate. Lieutenant Dan Foster had seen his share of corruption cases in 23 years on the force. But the evidence Ruth Caldwell laid across his desk made even his weathered cynicism crack. How long have you had this? Foster asked, his finger hovering over the play button on the audio file labeled Silas_problem_March_1981. We received it 18 hours ago, Ruth said carefully, from a source inside Brennan Construction who wishes to remain anonymous until formal charges are filed. Foster knew better than to press. Whistleblower protection was crucial in cases like this. He clicked play. Porter Brennan's voice filled the small office, discussing murder with the casual tone most people use to order lunch. Foster listened to all 3 recordings without interruption, his jaw tightening with each casual admission of conspiracy and premeditated killing. This is admissible, he said finally. Chain of custody will be a challenge, but with proper authentication and supporting evidence. He looked up at Ruth. You have supporting evidence? Ruth slid a folder across the desk. Financial records showing payments to Victor Cade, a known contractor with a dishonorable discharge and suspected involvement in at least 4 other suspicious deaths. Engineering reports showing the Route 42 guardrails failed to meet specifications. Witness testimony from Hazel Brennan about her accident. Medical records, newspaper clippings, everything you need to establish pattern and intent. Foster opened the folder, scanning documents with practiced efficiency. Where's Hazel Brennan now? Safe, protected. She'll testify when you're ready to make arrests. And your anonymous source? Also protected, also willing to testify. Foster sat back in his chair, processing. A case this big, against a sitting mayor with connections throughout state government, couldn't be handled casually. One mistake and Porter's lawyers would shred it. But if they did it right, if they built the case properly, They could bring down an entire corrupt network. I need to bring in the Attorney General's office, Foster said. This goes beyond local jurisdiction. We're talking murder, conspiracy, fraud, corruption of public officials. This is RICO territory. How long? To build a prosecutable case? With evidence this strong? I can have warrants for Porter Brennan and Victor Cade within 24 hours. But I need your people to stay safe and stay quiet until we're ready to move. If Porter gets wind that we're coming, he'll run or destroy evidence. He already knows something's happening. He's using Sheriff Morris to search for Hazel, claiming she's a vulnerable adult who needs protection. Foster's expression darkened. Morris is dirty? Deeply. Payment records show regular deposits from Brennan Construction to an LLC Morris owns. We suspect at least 2 county commissioners and 4 state inspectors are also compromised. Then we do this by the book, with state resources Porter can't touch. Foster stood, extending his hand. 24 hours. Keep your people safe. Don't engage. Let us handle the arrests. Ruth shook his hand. 24 hours. She left the barracks and climbed into her pickup truck, where Earl waited in the passenger seat. How'd it go? Foster's on board. He's looping in the Attorney General. Warrants for Porter and Victor within a day. A day is a long time when a killer's hunting. I know. They drove in silence back toward Millbrook, taking the long route that avoided the town center. Ruth's phone rang. Merrick. Status? Foster's moving. 24 hours to warrants. We might not have 24 hours. Merrick's voice was tight. Sheriff's Department raided the clubhouse an hour ago. Found nothing, but Morris knows we're planning something. He's got deputies canvassing, asking about Earl's whereabouts, looking for anyone who might know about Bill's cabin. Do they know about the cabin? Not yet, but Millbrook's a small town. Someone will remember Bill talking about his hunting spot, put 2 and 2 together. What about Maureen? Safe. We moved her to a different location after you left. But Porter's escalating. He held a press conference an hour ago, claiming Hazel's been kidnapped by a dangerous motorcycle gang, that his son is being held hostage. He's playing the concerned father, asking for public help locating them. Ruth's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He's building his narrative, making us the villains before we can expose him. Exactly, which is why we need a countermove, something public, something that forces Porter to respond before he's ready. Foster said to stay quiet. Foster's 2 hours away building a case. We're here, on the ground, with Porter actively hunting our people. Different rules apply. Earl leaned toward the phone. What are you thinking, Wade? Nell Harper at the Tribune has been sitting on her story, waiting for us to give the green light. What if we give it to her? Everything. The recordings, the Dalton's testimony. Force this into the public eye before Porter can spin it his way. That could compromise Foster's investigation. Or it could protect it. Hard to make evidence disappear when it's already published in every newspaper in Pennsylvania. Ruth considered. Merrick was right about one thing. They couldn't just wait passively while Porter mobilized against them. But going public prematurely could backfire. Give Porter time to craft legal defenses, pressure witnesses, muddy the waters. Let me talk to Hazel, Ruth said finally. This is her father's murder we're exposing. Her story to tell. She should have a say in timing. Fair enough. Call me back in an hour. The line went dead. Earl looked at Ruth. What do you think? I think we're all old soldiers trying to fight a modern war. Porter's using the media, the legal system, public sympathy. We need to do the same or we'll lose before the real battle even starts. They reached Bill's cabin as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Hazel was on the porch, sketching in the fading light. Dalton sat nearby, looking like someone who'd aged a decade in 18 hours. Garrett stood watch at the tree line, his military training evident in the way he scanned approaches. Ruth laid out the situation without sugarcoating. Foster needs 24 hours. Merrick wants to go public now. It's your call, Hazel. This is your father's legacy, your story. How do you want to play it? Hazel set down her sketchbook. For a long moment, she stared at the drawing she'd been working on, a portrait of her father in his Iron Brotherhood jacket, young and fierce and alive. The father she'd never really known. "What would Dad do?" Earl answered without hesitation. Silas would have gone loud. He didn't believe in letting bullies control the narrative. When he decided to expose Porter, he wasn't quiet about it. He scheduled that meeting with state transportation, told people what he'd found, made sure that if anything happened to him, others would know to ask questions. And he died for it. Yes, but his death started something. 6 years of us gathering evidence, building a case, waiting for the right moment. His courage bought us time to do this right. Hazel looked at Dalton. "What about you? If we go public, your father goes to prison. Your family name becomes synonymous with corruption and murder. You ready for that?" Dalton's laugh was bitter. "My family name already means those things. I just didn't want to see it. Going public doesn't change what my father is. It just makes everyone else see the truth I've been avoiding. You could still walk away, claim we forced you to give us that USB drive. Your father would protect you, rebuild his empire, and you'd stay part of the Brennan legacy. A legacy built on my father murdering yours? On him trying to kill you?" Dalton shook his head. "I'd rather burn it all down and start over as nobody than live as the son of a monster." Hazel turned to Ruth. "Call Merrick. Tell him to give Nell Harper everything. I want the story in tomorrow's morning edition, and I want to be the one who tells it." Ruth nodded, already dialing. Within an hour, the machinery of modern journalism began grinding. Nell Harper arrived at the cabin in a sedan that had seen better years, carrying recording equipment and a photographer who looked young enough to be in high school. She set up quickly, professionally, transforming Bill's rustic living room into an impromptu press conference space. "This will run in tomorrow's print edition," Nell explained, "but it'll hit our website tonight at 10 p.m. Once it's live, every major outlet in the state will pick it up. By morning, this story will be everywhere." She positioned Hazel near the fireplace, the warm light softening the hard edges of the story they were about to tell. Dalton sat to her right, his presence a powerful visual. The mayor's son standing with his father's accuser. The photographer snapped preliminary shots while Nell set up her questions. "I need you to walk me through everything. Your father's investigation, his death, your accident, the evidence. Keep it clear, keep it factual. Porter's lawyers will look for any exaggeration or inconsistency to attack." Hazel took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm ready." The interview lasted 90 minutes. Hazel spoke carefully, precisely, sticking to facts she could prove. Nell asked follow-up questions, pushing for details that would make the story impossible to dismiss. Dalton corroborated timelines, provided insider perspective on his father's operations, explained how he'd found the evidence. Earl and Ruth sat off camera, listening as 6 years of investigation condensed into a narrative that would either bring Porter Brennan down or paint them all as conspiracy theorists attacking a respected public servant. "Last question," Nell said as the recording approached the 2-hour mark. "Why come forward now? Why not wait for authorities to build their case?" Hazel glanced at Earl, at Ruth, at Garrett standing guard by the window, at the old soldiers who'd kept faith with her father's memory when no one else would. "Because my father taught me that silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of corruption. Porter Brennan murdered my father and got away with it for 6 years. He caused my accident and made me blame myself. He's built an empire on cutting corners and bribing officials, putting lives at risk every day. And he's done it all while hiding behind respectability and political power." Her voice strengthened. "I'm coming forward because someone has to. Because if people like Porter can murder and steal and destroy lives without consequence, then what's the point of law? What's the point of justice? My father believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. This is me honoring that belief." Nell nodded, satisfied. "That's perfect. Give me 3 hours to write this up, fact check with my editors, and prepare for legal review. It'll be live by 10. She packed her equipment efficiently, shook hands all around, and disappeared into the Pennsylvania night. The photographer followed, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with anticipation. "Now what?" Dalton asked. "Now we wait," Merrick said, appearing in the doorway. He'd arrived during the interview, staying back to let it proceed without distraction. "And we prepare for Porter's response." "What kind of response?" "The kind that desperate men make when their empires crumble." Merrick's face was grim. "Porter spent 30 years building power. He won't surrender it without a fight." The prophecy came true faster than anyone expected. At 8:30 p.m., 2 hours before Nell's story was scheduled to go live, Maureen's phone rang. The number was blocked. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Mrs. Brennan." Porter's voice was silk over steel. "We need to talk about your daughter." Maureen's hand tightened on the phone. She was in a safe house on the far side of Millbrook, guarded by 2 Iron Brotherhood members, but Porter's voice still sent ice through her veins. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then listen. I know what Hazel's planning. I know she's given an interview to that hack reporter. I know she's preparing to make wild accusations that will destroy my reputation and devastate my family." "Wild accusations? You murdered my husband." The line went silent for a heartbeat. When Porter spoke again, the silk was gone, leaving only steel. "I did what was necessary to protect my business and my family. Silas was going to destroy everything I'd built over some misguided sense of civic duty. I gave him chances to back down. He refused. Actions have consequences." "You're admitting it." "I'm stating facts to someone who can't prove anything. Your word against mine, Maureen, and I'm the mayor of Millbrook. You're the widow of a man who died drunk driving in the rain." "Silas didn't drink." "The police report says otherwise. Funny how official records always seem to support the right narrative." Maureen felt her guards tense, listening to her side of the conversation. She put the phone on speaker. "What do you want, Porter?" "I want Hazel to withdraw her interview. I want Dalton returned to me. I want the Iron Brotherhood to stand down and forget this whole unfortunate misunderstanding. In exchange, I'll ensure your daughter doesn't have another accident. I'll make sure you keep your job at the hospital. I'll let everyone live their quiet lives without further complications. And if we refuse, then I activate contingencies. Victor is very good at his job, Maureen. He's made 14 problems disappear over the years. What's a few more? Especially when everyone knows how unstable Hazel's been since her accident. So tragic when disabled people make desperate choices. The threat was clear. Refuse and people would die, their deaths staged to look like accidents or suicides. Maureen took a breath, choosing her words carefully. You're assuming we don't have insurance. Evidence distributed to multiple locations. Instructions to release everything if anything happens to us. Porter laughed. I'm sure you think you do, but information can be suppressed, Maureen. People can be persuaded or intimidated into silence. I've been doing this for 3 decades. I'm very, very good at it. Then I guess we'll see who's better. She hung up before he could respond. One of her guards, Sergeant Miles Harding, immediately called Merrick. We've got a problem. Porter just made direct threats against Hazel and Maureen. He knows about the interview. He's preparing to move. How could he know? Only our inner circle was aware. Someone talked, or he's tapping phones, or he has someone inside the Tribune. Miles's voice was tense. Point is, he knows, and he's not waiting for the story to drop. He's acting now. Merrick made a decision. Nell Harper, call her now. Move the publication up. Get it live immediately. She said she needed 3 hours for legal review. She doesn't have 3 hours. None of us do. Miles relayed the message while Merrick called Bill's cabin. Earl answered on the first ring. Porter knows, Merrick said without preamble. He's made threats against Maureen and Hazel. We're pushing the story live now, ahead of schedule, which means Porter will escalate immediately. Victor? Almost certainly. If Porter's going to silence witnesses, he'll do it before the story breaks. You need to fortify that cabin and prepare for a siege. Earl looked around the small space. 3 old bikers, 1 young veteran, a doctor, and 2 teenagers who'd never fired a weapon in their lives. Against a professional killer who'd eliminated 14 targets over 3 decades. "We'll hold," Earl said with more confidence than he felt. "Bill's on his way with 4 more brothers. They'll be there in 20 minutes. Foster's aware of the situation. State police are en route, but they're 90 minutes out. You need to hold for 90 minutes. "Roger that." Earl ended the call and turned to the others. "We've got incoming. Victor Cade, possibly with support. State police are coming, but we're on our own for the next hour and a half." Garrett was already moving, checking sight lines through windows, identifying defensive positions. His ranger training kicked in automatically. Assess terrain, establish fields of fire, create fallback positions. "This cabin is defensible," he said, more to himself than the others. "Single story, small windows, solid walls. Main approaches from the east and south. We can channel attackers, create choke points." "We're not soldiers," Dalton said, his voice shaking. "I don't even know how to shoot." "Then you stay in the back room with Hazel and keep your head down." Garrett's tone was firm but not unkind. "Let us handle this." Ruth was pulling medical supplies from her bag, setting up a triage area in the bathroom. "Anyone gets hit, bring them to me. I've treated combat wounds before. I can keep you alive until real help arrives." The sound of vehicles outside, multiple engines moving fast, everyone froze. Then Earl relaxed. "That's Bill. Harleys, not SUVs." Sure enough, 4 motorcycles pulled into the clearing, their riders dismounting with practiced efficiency. Bill himself led them, carrying a duffel bag that clinked with the unmistakable sound of firearms. "Brought party favors," Bill announced, unzipping the bag to reveal an arsenal that had clearly been accumulated over decades. Hunting rifles, shotguns, even a few military surplus weapons that were probably legal only because nobody had asked too many questions. "We're not starting a war," Ruth cautioned. "We're finishing one," Bill corrected. "Porter started this war when he killed Silas. We're just ending it." Weapons were distributed. Earl took a lever-action rifle he'd owned since 1955. The other bikers claimed weapons with the familiarity of men who'd grown up in an era when every Pennsylvania household had guns for hunting. Garrett selected a shotgun, checking its action with professional competence. They took positions, Earl at the front window overlooking the main approach, Bill at the side window covering the trail from the south, Garrett near the door, mobile and ready. The other bikers spread throughout the cabin, creating overlapping fields of fire. Hazel and Dalton retreated to the back bedroom, as instructed. Ruth joined them, carrying her medical bag. "If shooting starts, get on the floor. Stay away from windows. Don't move until someone tells you it's safe." The waiting was worse than combat. At least in combat you could act, could channel fear into movement. Waiting meant sitting with your thoughts, imagining every possible way things could go wrong. 30 minutes passed. 45. The sun had fully set now, leaving only darkness and the faint light from the cabin windows. A stupid tactical choice, making themselves visible. But turning off the lights would signal that they knew an attack was coming. Earl's phone buzzed. A text from Nell Harper. "Story is live. Already getting traction. AP and Reuters picking it up. You're about to be national news." He showed the message to Bill. "It's done. The truth is out. Then Porter's got nothing to lose. He'll come at us with everything." As if summoned by the words, headlights appeared at the edge of the clearing. Not on the main trail, too obvious, but cutting through the trees from the northwest, an approach that shouldn't have been accessible to vehicles. "SUV," Garrett reported. "Same one from earlier. Victor's." The vehicle stopped 200 yards out, just beyond effective range for the weapons they had. The headlights cut out, plunging that section of forest into darkness. A voice called out, amplified by a megaphone. "I'm here for Porter Brennan's son. Send him out and no one else gets hurt. Earl responded by opening the front door just wide enough to be heard. Not happening, Victor. Dalton's under our protection. You're harboring a minor who's been coerced into making false statements against his father. I'm authorized to retrieve him by any means necessary. Authorized by who? The man who hired you to commit murder? A pause. Then, last chance, send out the boy. Come get him. The first shot shattered the front window, missing Earl by inches. He dropped into a crouch, returning fire with the lever action. The range was too great for accuracy, but the message was clear. They weren't surrendering. More shots followed, methodical and precise. Victor wasn't spraying bullets wildly. He was targeting specific points, testing their defenses, looking for weaknesses. He's got a rifle, Bill observed, probably scoped. He can pick us off from distance while we can't reach him. Then we make him come closer. Earl called out again. You're not getting the boy, Victor, but I've got something else you might want. The USB drive with all of Porter's dirty secrets. Original copy. Only one left after we sent copies to the police. Another pause. Earl could almost hear Victor calculating. The USB drive was leverage, potentially the only thing standing between Porter and a murder conviction. Prove you have it. Earl held up the drive, actually a decoy. The real evidence was already with Foster, but Victor didn't know that, silhouetting it against the cabin's interior light. Come get it. The SUV's engine roared to life. Victor was moving, closing the distance, gambling that he could retrieve the drive and eliminate witnesses before they could stop him. Garrett smiled grimly. And now he's in range. The SUV accelerated toward the cabin, Victor driving one-handed while firing out the window with the other. Bullets punched through the cabin walls, forcing everyone down. But Garrett had been waiting for this. He'd positioned himself at an angle where the SUV's approach would bring it past a large oak tree. As Victor drove past, Garrett fired. The shotgun blast caught the SUV's front tire, shredding it. The vehicle swerved, its damaged tire digging into soft earth. Victor compensated, kept coming, but his speed was gone. Bill fired next, his hunting rifle cracking twice. The windshield spiderwebbed. The SUV veered hard left, trying to evade, and slammed into a tree stump hidden in the underbrush. The impact wasn't dramatic, maybe 20 miles per hour, but it was enough. The SUV lurched to a stop, steam rising from a ruptured radiator. Victor emerged from the driver's side, moving with the fluid competence of a professional. He'd lost the element of surprise, but not his composure. Using the SUV as cover, he began working his way around the cabin, looking for entry points. He's circling, one of the other bikers reported, trying to flank us. They shifted positions, trying to track his movement, but Victor was good. He used darkness and terrain like weapons, appearing just long enough to fire before vanishing again. A window shattered at the back of the cabin. Ruth's voice. He's trying the bedroom window. Garrett sprinted toward the back, arriving in time to see Victor's silhouette outside the broken glass. He fired, missing, but driving Victor back into the darkness. The bedroom door opened. Hazel appeared in her wheelchair, face pale but determined. We need to end this. He's going to pick us off, one by one. Get back, Garrett ordered. No, listen to me. Victor wants the USB drive, so let's give it to him. Earl materialized from the hallway. What are you thinking? I'll wheel myself out. Tell him I'm surrendering the drive. When he comes for it, you have a clear shot. Absolutely not. You're not bait. I'm the only bait that'll work. He won't believe anyone else. But a scared girl in a wheelchair, giving up to save her friends, that's believable. Hazel, my father died fighting Porter. I'm not going to hide while other people die fighting his hired killer. Her jaw set in a line Earl recognized. Silas had looked exactly the same when he'd made the decision to charge Chinese positions at Chosin. Stubborn, brave, possibly suicidal. 5 minutes, Earl said finally. We give Foster 5 more minutes to get here with state police. If Victor's still active, We try your plan. Those 5 minutes felt like hours. Victor continued his methodical assault, never in one place long enough to target, always probing, always testing. Another window broke. A bullet punched through the doorframe, missing Bill's head by inches. The bikers returned fire when they had targets, but mostly they hunkered down, conserving ammunition, waiting for either Victor to make a mistake or reinforcements to arrive. Neither happened. At 4 minutes, Earl made the call. We do this now, Hazel's plan. Garrett looked he wanted to argue, but professional assessment won over emotion. They were losing the tactical situation. Without dramatic action, Victor would eventually find a weakness and exploit it. I'll cover her, Garrett said. The second Victor shows himself, I take the shot. They positioned Hazel at the front door. She held the decoy USB drive in trembling hands. Earl called out into the darkness. Victor, we're done. You win. Hazel's coming out with the drive. Don't shoot. Silence. Then, send her out, alone. Anyone follows and I put a bullet in her spine. Earl looked at Hazel. Last chance to back out. She shook her head. No retreat. They opened the door. Hazel wheeled herself onto the porch, into the open, bathed in light from the cabin behind her. She held up the USB drive so Victor could see it. I'm unarmed, she called out. I'm alone. I just want this to stop. Movement in the darkness. Victor emerged from the tree line, rifle raised but not aimed. He approached slowly, scanning for traps, his professional paranoia warring with the temptation of the prize. 50 yards, 40, 30. Garrett had his shot. Could take it, should take it, but something stopped him. Some instinct honed by years of combat. This was too easy. Victor was too exposed. A professional wouldn't walk into the open like this unless... It's a diversion, Garrett screamed. He spun toward the back of the cabin just as a second figure emerged from the rear bedroom window. Not Victor, someone else. Younger, faster, moving with military precision. Porter's backup plan. A second contractor. Garrett fired without thinking, his shot catching the intruder in the shoulder. The man spun, returned fire. Garrett felt something punch his side, felt himself falling. The careful plan dissolved into chaos. Victor sprinted toward Hazel, crossing the remaining distance in seconds. But Earl was faster, tackling the killer from the side, both men going down in a tangle of old limbs and professional violence. Hazel screamed, wheeling backward trying to get inside. The second contractor, bleeding from his shoulder, raised his weapon toward Earl and Victor's struggling forms. A shotgun blast from the cabin doorway. Bill, his aim still true at 72, caught the contractor in the chest. The man went down hard and didn't get up. Victor threw Earl off, reached for his rifle. Ruth appeared from nowhere with a tire iron from Bill's truck, swinging it like a baseball bat. It connected with Victor's skull with a sound like a melon splitting. Victor crumpled. And then, blessed silence. Earl lay on the ground, breathing hard, checking himself for injuries. Bruises, definitely. Maybe cracked ribs, but alive. Ruth was already moving to Garrett, who sat against the cabin wall pressing a hand to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, but he was conscious, alert, giving Ruth status updates in clipped military language. Through and through, lower left abdomen. Missed the vitals. I'm okay. You're not okay, you're shot, Ruth countered, but her hands were already working, applying pressure, assessing damage. Sirens in the distance, multiple vehicles. The state police, arriving precisely 4 minutes too late to be useful, but perfectly timed to handle cleanup. Lieutenant Foster emerged from the lead vehicle, weapon drawn, taking in the scene with professional assessment. 2 bodies, 1 wounded defender, an unconscious Victor Cade with his hands already being zip-tied by Bill. Jesus Christ, Foster muttered. I said don't engage. He engaged us, Earl said from his position on the ground. We just didn't die. More state police flooded the clearing, securing the scene, calling for ambulances, beginning the documentation that would turn a gunfight into official record. Foster approached Hazel, who still sat on the porch, shaking with adrenaline crash. "You okay, Miss Brennan?" "I've been better. Your interview went live 45 minutes ago. It's everywhere. AP, Reuters, CNN. Porter Brennan is national news. We've got arrest warrants being executed right now." "Is he in custody?" Foster's face darkened. "Not yet. When his people showed up to arrest him, Porter wasn't at his office or his home. We've got an APB out, roadblocks at state lines, but he's running." Earl pulled himself to his feet with Bill's help. "He won't run far. Man like Porter, his identity is tied to his power. Take away Millbrook, take away his empire, and he's got nothing. He'll surface." "How can you be sure?" "Because I know men like him. They can't imagine a world where they're not in control. He'll make a stand, try to regain narrative control. It's what bullies do when they're cornered." The prophecy proved accurate 6 hours later. Hazel was in Millbrook Hospital, getting checked for shock and minor injuries. Garrett was in surgery, getting his gunshot wound properly treated. The Iron Brotherhood had gathered in the waiting room, looking like what they were, old soldiers after a battle, tired but unbowed. The television in the corner was tuned to local news, and suddenly every head turned. Porter Brennan stood at a podium outside Millbrook Town Hall, looking haggard but defiant. Behind him, Sheriff Morris and 2 council members who hadn't been arrested yet. "I'm here," Porter began, his politician's voice strained, "to address the vicious lies being spread about me and my family. These accusations of murder and corruption are fabrications created by a motorcycle gang with a grudge and a disabled girl who's been manipulated." The feed cut. Not technical difficulties, a deliberate interruption. When it returned, Lieutenant Foster stood at the same podium, 2 state troopers flanking him. "Porter Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, corruption of public officials, and approximately 40 other charges that will be detailed in your arraignment. You have the right to remain silent." The television showed Porter being handcuffed, his carefully constructed mask finally shattering. He screamed something about his lawyers, about this being illegal, about having friends in high places. But his friends were already abandoning him. The council members behind him stepped away. Sheriff Morris, reading the situation, made no move to intervene. Porter Brennan, mayor of Millbrook for 12 years, architect of an empire built on corruption and murder, was led away in handcuffs while cameras recorded every humiliating second. In the hospital waiting room, the Iron Brotherhood watched in silence. Then Bill started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. A standing ovation for a television screen, for justice delayed but not denied, for a battle 6 years in the making finally won. Earl found Hazel in her hospital room, staring out the window at Millbrook's lights. "You did it," he said quietly. "Finished what your father started. We did it, all of us. No, you made the choice to go public. You put yourself at risk. You were the face that made people listen." Earl sat in the chair beside her bed. Silas would be proud. Hazel's eyes filled with tears. "I wish he could see it. Maybe he can. I'm old enough to believe in things I can't prove." Earl reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, the same one from the clubhouse, showing Silas young and alive with his brothers. "I want you to have this. Your father at his best, happy, free, surrounded by family. The Iron Brotherhood. Yes, and now you're part of that family too, if you want to be." Hazel held the photograph, tracing her father's face with gentle fingers. "I want to be." 3 weeks later, Captain Silas Brennan was laid to proper rest. They'd exhumed his body, performed a thorough autopsy that revealed traces of sedatives in bone marrow that had been missed the first time. Evidence of drugging before the crash. More proof of murder, though the case against Porter no longer needed it. The funeral was everything the first one hadn't been. Honest, full of truth, attended by the people who'd actually known and loved him. The Iron Brotherhood showed up in full dress, 15 motorcycles in perfect formation, leading the hearse from the church to the cemetery. Hazel rode in the lead car with her mother, both women finally able to grieve properly. At the graveside, Colonel Merrick gave the eulogy. Captain Silas Brennan died doing what he always did, fighting for what was right. He saw corruption poisoning his town and refused to look away. He gathered evidence knowing it put him at risk. And when he was murdered for that courage, he left behind a daughter who inherited not just his name, but his principles. Merrick looked at Hazel. Silas died 6 years ago, but his fight continued. Through the brothers who honored his memory, through the daughter who refused to let his death be meaningless, through everyone who believed that justice delayed is not justice denied. They lowered the casket with full military honors. A 21-gun salute echoed across the cemetery. Taps played, the mournful notes carrying across graves of other soldiers, other patriots, other people who'd believed in something bigger than themselves. Hazel placed a single rose on the casket. Thank you, Dad, for teaching me to stand up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Maureen placed her rose beside her daughter's. Rest now, my love. Your work is finished. But it wasn't. Not quite. 6 months later, Hazel stood in a small office building on the edge of Millbrook. The sign outside read, "The Silas Brennan Foundation, Justice for Construction, Nagnason's Victims." The office Grochas often read into the most himselfment of what it looked like. The office was modest. 2 rooms, donated furniture, a volunteer staff that consisted of Hazel, Garrett, recovered from his gunshot wound, and rotating shifts of Iron Brotherhood members who decided retirement was overrated. Their first case had just walked through the door, a woman from Ohio whose husband died when a bridge collapsed. The same engineering firm that worked with Brennan Construction. The same pattern of cut corners and falsified inspections. "We can help you," Hazel told her, wheeling forward to shake her hand. "That's what we do. We help people who've been failed by the system." Garrett was already pulling files, making calls to structural engineers willing to testify. The Iron Brotherhood had connections throughout the Mid-Atlantic, veterans who'd gone into construction and engineering, who knew what proper safety looked like and weren't afraid to call out violations. By the end of the day, they'd taken on 3 new cases. A week later, 5 more. Within a month, the foundation was handling 17 investigations across 4 states. Porter Brennan's empire had extended further than anyone realized. But now, every project he'd touched was being reviewed. Every corner he'd cut was being documented. Every victim was finding a voice. The trial itself was anticlimactic. With the recordings, the financial evidence, and Dalton's testimony, Porter's lawyers advised him to take a plea deal. 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder. No possibility of parole. Victor Cade, facing capital murder charges, also pleaded out. Life in prison. Sheriff Morris got 5 years for corruption. 2 state inspectors and a county commissioner went down as well. The system that enabled Porter's corruption didn't disappear overnight, but it cracked. And through those cracks, light began seeping in. 1 year after the confrontation at Murphy's Diner, Hazel returned to the same booth where Dalton had humiliated her. Frank Murphy saw her coming and already had pancakes on the griddle. "Your usual spot," he said, gesturing to the corner booth. But Hazel wheeled herself to a different table, the one in the center of the diner. No longer hiding, no longer diminished. She ordered pancakes and coffee and pulled out her sketchbook. Today she was drawing the future, a building larger than their current office, a full-time staff, satellite offices in other states. The Silas Brennan Foundation was growing. The bell above the door chimed. Earl walked in, followed by Bill and Merrick. They'd started coming to Murphy's every Tuesday, maintaining the tradition Silas had started decades ago. They pulled up chairs around Hazel's table without asking. A family formed not by blood, but by shared purpose. "How many cases this week?" Merrick asked. 12. "We're going to need more volunteers." I'll make some calls. Bill already had his phone out, texting other Iron Brotherhood chapters throughout Pennsylvania and beyond. Garrett arrived with a folder thick with documents. The Cleveland Bridge case. We've got an engineer willing to testify that the steel was substandard. And I found 3 other bridges built by the same company using the same specifications. Hazel smiled, accepting the folder. Then we've got work to do. Outside, the sun climbed higher over Millbrook. The steel mill was still closed. The economy was still struggling. But something had changed in the town's fundamental character. People were asking questions again, demanding accountability, refusing to accept that corruption was just the cost of doing business. One girl in a wheelchair and a brotherhood of old bikers had proven that ordinary people could fight power and win. Hazel's phone buzzed. A text from Dalton, who was finishing his associate's degree at community college, working part-time at the foundation, building a life separate from his father's legacy. New lead, construction fraud in Pittsburgh. Looks big. Hazel texted back. On it. She finished her pancakes, finally able to eat them without fear of humiliation. She paid her check, thanked Frank, and wheeled toward the door. The Iron Brotherhood followed. Outside, 15 motorcycles sat waiting. Not for war this time, for work, for justice, for continuing the fight that Silas Brennan had started and that his daughter had inherited. Hazel paused at the door, looking back at Murphy's Diner one last time. The place where everything had changed. Where a bully had made a mistake. Where old soldiers had kept a promise. Where a girl in a wheelchair had learned that courage didn't require legs. It only required standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. Earl appeared beside her, offering the familiar challenge coin he'd placed on her table that first day. Your father's. I think you should have it. Hazel accepted it, feeling the weight of legacy and responsibility and honor. Thank you for everything, for keeping your promise to Dad. We're not done keeping it. That foundation of yours, that's Silas's legacy continuing, and we're going to help you build it into something that scares every corrupt official in America. That's a big goal. Your father saved 11 lives in Korea. You're going to save hundreds, maybe thousands. Earl smiled, his weathered face creasing into lines that suggested hope, not just endurance. I'd say that makes you the hero he always knew you'd be. The motorcycles roared to life, one by one, creating a symphony of American steel and determination. Hazel wheeled down the ramp Frank had installed specifically for her, positioning herself at the head of the formation. Not on a bike, that would come later, with modifications, but leading nonetheless. The Iron Brotherhood fell into formation behind her. Together they rode toward the next case, the next victim, the next battle in a war against corruption that would never fully end, but would always be worth fighting. Because justice didn't arrive on white horses anymore. It arrived on Harley Davidsons, ridden by old soldiers who'd never forgotten what honor meant, led by a young woman who'd learned that disability couldn't diminish courage. And together, they were unstoppable. The convoy disappeared down Main Street, their engines echoing off empty storefronts in dying mills, a sound of defiance in a town learning to hope again. Behind them, a sign began going up on the old Brennan construction building. New ownership, new purpose, new future. The building that had housed corruption would become affordable housing for families displaced by the steel mill closure. Even in defeat, Porter Brennan's empire was being transformed into something that served the community instead of exploiting it. Hazel Brennan wheeled forward, the Iron Brotherhood at her back, her father's legacy in her heart, and justice as her destination. The road ahead was long, but she was ready to ride it, all the way to the end.